Do I close this? What do you think? Because I want to see.
Personal preference. It's time to say hello to our viewers. Hi, everybody.
Hey, everybody. Oh, here we go. There we go. Everybody, welcome. So glad you all are here. I'm here with Pastor Matt, the one and only. Pastor Matt just told me today he thought that today's sermon was the best sermon ever preached at Grace Community Church. Thank you, Pastor Matt, for doing that. So we're going to do a Q&A. If you'll type it in the chat, that's how we'll get your questions, and then we'll respond to it. And just as a reminder, we're summing up what we've done for the last 3 Sundays. So we spoke on some really big topics, right? We talked about, is the Bible literal? And then we talked about why so much violence in the Bible, like wipe out the Amalekites. And then Pastor Matt talked about this morning, how can a loving God send people to hell? So if you could give questions that are just on those topics, that would be fantastic. And so as you're chatting in, we're watching it over here. So as you chat something in, we will respond to it on that. And I think just as a big picture, what we would like to remind everybody of is something that I actually talked about for the past 2 weeks before Sunday morning, is that the Bible is filled with metaphors. It's filled with paradox. It's filled with all the thick poetry of ancient wisdom literature. And if we keep that in mind, that's going to really help us to understand how to embrace the Bible for everything that it is, because the Bible is a phenomenal and amazing book. So we're going to watch the chat. As soon as a question comes in, we will respond to the question about any of those 3 topics. Is the Bible literal? How about all the violence? And then finally, can a loving God send people to hell? Now I'm going to ask Pastor Matt to say hello and anything that he'd like to say while we're waiting on a question.
Hey, everybody. It's nice to see you. Actually, I can't see you. I wish I could. But I'm looking forward to this. And we'll see what we dig into. Would love to, hear like what the whatabouts that everybody's been leaving church with. I know for us, there's so much that we want to include into every sermon we prepare, and that's maybe the most painful task is, choosing what doesn't make the cut.
Right.
And so maybe tonight is an opportunity to share some of that stuff, depending on the questions.
Yeah.
But I know you feel the same way.
Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff gets left at the chopping blocks on the editing floor.
That's
okay.
Right.
Just for white people who are reference until. Okay, I'll read it out because we got a couple coming in. The sermon this morning focused on a justification for why people who are prideful are sent to hell, and suggested this was essentially their choice, if I understood correctly. Okay. So I just want to make sure we're getting your question correct. Okay.
Can we read all the questions coming in?
Yeah. Oh, here's a second part. There's a second part to Rachel's question.
The same thing. Yeah.
Second part, Rachel said, what can I say to someone who is asking how a Muslim, who may be one of the most selfless people on earth, will be sent to hell because they don't believe in God the right way? Excellent question, Rachel. All right, Amanda, how can a loving God let bad things happen to good people? Excellent question. I think we're going to really get into that. We're going to do a series on the book of Esther starting in September, and we're going to dig into that question a lot. I grew up learning and believing the Bible is inerrant, but through recent research for truth and prayer, I kind of realized that the Bible might not be inerrant. What do you think, Pastor? That's a really big question. I think the Bible is completely inerrant in its message for sure, but we'll come back to that. And then down here we got regarding heaven and hell, what happens to people and children who've never had the chance to hear the word of the Lord? Matt, do you want to jump in somewhere on this, or how do you want to start, big man?
Yeah, I mean, we really have 3 questions about heaven and hell. Then a question really for you that is about how do we really read the Bible? We read it literally. That speaks to the inerrancy question, right? So there's some confusion around that. I guess what I'm hearing in these three questions about, at the end of the day, who gets sent to hell, and how can it be, our good people that we know and love, and women and children who never hear about Jesus. And to be totally honest, I just think those are great questions. And I'm not sure there's a lot of really clear data points in scripture about that. So I would start with, I'm not totally sure. And I would lean back into something I really tried to focus on this morning, is that when it comes down to some of the things that we don't know exactly for sure, we got to lean into what we know. And it's the character of God. You actually said this to me years ago, because I think we were just talking about it, maybe because I was kind of wrestling through this with some teens in the youth group. And you kind of said this to me, which, look, we got to just trust the character of God. You've got a God who's willing to do all that he did so that we could have life and life eternal, right? It's not in line with the narrative that paints God as kind of a vindictive person who's, you didn't hear, the timing wasn't right. I don't know. So that's where I would start. I guess I'm convinced that the character of God is good and unimpeachable. Yeah. And that when it comes down to it, God is just, and he's going to do the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great answer, Matt. That's the consistent storyline of the Bible. I just add just a little bit to that. And that is, we are really consumed in the Western world, Western Christianity, with about a heaven and hell and a future life. And this is something that is clear throughout church history. We have become more and more consumed with that. Here's the hard thing. And, for me, I had to begin to dig into this, is actually the Bible, particularly those first 5 books of the Bible. Jesus calls them the law. He says in the Sermon on the Mount, I've come to fulfill the law. What he's talking about, I came to fulfill what the Bible actually considers like the foundation of the Bible, those first 5 books. He says on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24, is this beginning with the law. And so he always starts that way, the law. Why? Because some people call it Pentateuch, some people call it Torah, some people call it the 5 books of Moses. That is the foundation, and everything kind of builds on those 5 books. It's critical. That's why the early biblical scholars, were talking way back when, 2,000 years ago, they would memorize those first 5 books. Here's the reality. Those first 5 books are very, very interested in the life here and now. Like, hey, great, you get to go to heaven. That's awesome. But life is really bad here now, right here now. It's like hell. It's like hell living on earth. And what God is far more interested in, and this is going to be so hard for some of us to get our brains wrapped around. And I had to, and it took me a while. Okay. The Bible itself is far more interested in you and I living out the message of Jesus Christ, the message of the Bible right here, right now, because some people are living hell on earth. Some of us are living hell on earth. And that is what changes the hell on earth to more of a heaven on earth. Thy kingdom come, this famous prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. So always when we talk about hell or we talk about heaven, the question always is 100%. No one's thinking it's about, okay, there and who gets sent there and then. And what the Bible almost all the time, everybody is thinking about is, are you living for Jesus now? Because if you live for Jesus now and according to his word, his will and his way, Jesus, I think you said this morning, he's the way, the truth, and life. That is what changes the world. That's what changes my life. But it doesn't just change my life, it changes Matt's life too. Because if I'm I'm kind of sort of Matt's boss, right?
Not kind of, sort of.
Okay. So
actually are my boss.
If I am leading in an unchristlike manner, Matt's going to have a terrible life. Okay. So I could, it could be hell on earth for Matt. Or I could lead like Jesus leads and things are going to change. That is what the Bible is really interested in. And I know that's like a mind shift change. Now I want to, because we need to read, so you read the questions now, Matt, that the new ones come in. I want to talk about the inerrancy one real quick.
Yeah.
And then I need to go back to the Muslim one.
I'll just read these to myself.
No. In just a second, you read them. In just a second. I'm just preparing you. Okay, preparing you.
Thank you.
Hey, the question about the Muslim person. Man, I hear you. And this is where Matt was saying a few moments ago, like God's character. God is the just judge. Human beings have no right. We feel powerful, and in our arrogance and our pride, hey, you're going to hell because you and this and that. We don't have the credentials. That's way above our pay grade. God's the just judge. He's going to make that decision. How, there was a couple people in a garden many years ago, and they wanted to be like God, and they end up having to leave the garden. They had to leave the presence of God because they're going to be like God. Well, for me to tell you who gets to go to heaven and who gets to go to hell, that's a God thing. That's not a John thing. That's a God thing. I'm not going to step in those shoes. I'm not that foolish to step in those shoes because that's the way the Bible begins. So and then the inerrancy, everybody, oh my gosh. The message of the Bible is so spectacular. Its message clearly is inerrant. There's no other message like it. There is no other message like it. And this is where we have often said, like, every great humanitarian movement has been built on the message of the Bible. Okay, Matt, you're up.
Yeah. So thanks for that. I know that your intention was to give me some time to read the questions.
That's right.
But I was listening to you.
Okay.
So let's read the questions now, and I'll do the best I can. So a couple more questions have come in along the lines of heaven and hell. So yeah, let me read them. So tells Platt, says, what if I lived and died as a Samaritan, and if I pursued love, kindness, mercy, would I also be saved? Yeah, really great question. And then we've got Chris chiming in, saying, Matt, I understood you suggest that hell and life refer to here and now more than after physical death. Kind of what you were actually just kind of reiterating. But how can the here and now have meaning without the sting of physical death? Which I'm going to be honest, I'm going to have to think about that one. So maybe first things first. The question about, if I die as a Samaritan, I pursued love, kindness, and mercy. I'm not sure this is the whole answer, but the first thing that popped into my mind was something that I read in one of Tim Keller's books, Reason for God. Mm-hmm. He shared this analogy for, what it's like to obtain or achieve or reach heaven on our own efforts or merit. And really, okay, I strive to love, I strive to be kind, I strive to pursue these things, right? And you know what? Some people actually do a pretty good job. Mm-hmm. But the thing that what Tim Keller shared was really interesting. He compared it to, like 1,000 people swimming from the coast of California to Hawaii. Yeah. Right. You remember this one?
Yes.
Yeah. And so there are some people who are really, really, really good swimmers. Yeah. And some people who are some pretty poor swimmers. So we have some people who are really good at being kind and loving, and some people who are not so much. But at the end of the day, our best swimmers, are you going to get to Hawaii?
Right. They're going to fall short.
Right. You're going to fall short. And this is really a synonym of Christianity, that Christ, Jesus Christ, he was the one who made it, right? And he lived the life that we could not live. Yeah. He did it perfectly. He was alone and unique in his holiness and his love. And the offer from Jesus was, look, I lived this life you couldn't live. I'm going to lay it down. Yeah. And if you choose, you can take it up, and it will serve as a covering for your life. Yeah. And I get the credit for the life that Jesus lived. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So I go back to that is my first thing. Yeah. What do you think?
I think that's good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah. Come on,
I can't build on that. Where'd you stop off, man?
Well, we got Chris's question about
my gosh.
Can here and now, I know.
Landrigan.
Don't say it like that. We love Landrigan.
Okay.
Send an email, Landrigan. One of the books that you send us. No, I want to wrestle with this.
Yes.
Quickly, just for fun. How can the here and now have meaning? With the sting of physical death. I think when I read it the first time, I read it wrong. Without the sting of physical.
That changes everything.
Yeah. Okay. So now I'm disoriented again to the question.
Well, can I jump in on are you gonna?
No, go. I'm gonna think about it.
Okay. Because right here, TSP boost, John 14:6. Is it literal? 100%. And this is where I come back to the message. What does John 14:6 say, man? I'm the way, the truth, and the life.
That's right.
There's no doubt about it that Jesus Christ is the way, truth. But wait a minute, before you hear that, because some of us heard that as a very arrogant statement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you got Jesus, you bet, you know what I'm saying? So what is the way of Jesus? This is something that starts in the very beginning of the Bible. And this is where Matt was trying to say this morning, and something we've been trying to focus on. What is the storyline in the Bible all the way through? So what does it mean when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life? The ways of Jesus. What are the ways of Jesus? Well, I think we talked about last week when we talked about violence. It's protecting, not exploiting the vulnerable, right? Not taking advantage of people. It's a big storyline. Equality, respect, love, okay? These major values that the Bible has introduced to the world. And this is where we come back to the message. Everybody, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of weeks when we talk about men and women, because people are like, well, is the Bible misogynistic? Is it anti-women? When Paul writes in Galatians, there's no male, there's no female, everybody. Nobody was writing that. We have no indication that anybody was even thinking that. That is why women were flocking to Jesus Christ. Okay, it's a radical, like we don't see it that way today. We're in the 21st century and we're not thinking the way. So when it was written in Genesis chapter 1 that everybody's created equal in the image of God, when it's written by Paul in Galatians that there's no male, no female, and all of that is so radical. And those are the very values that have changed the world. That's the way of Jesus, and that's the why it works. Do other people who don't call themselves followers of Jesus, other people who don't say the Bible is my way, are there people who are loving and patient and kind? Absolutely. They are. They're following the ways of Jesus because we all had the divine image inside of us. There's a lot of people who say, you know, I believe in Jesus. I'm all about Jesus. And they don't act very loving, patient, or kind. Mm-hmm. I just said to somebody recently, because they've been going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, into the study of the Bible, but they've been becoming much more judgmental as they have. And I just said, hey, are you sure you're understanding what this is saying? Yeah. Because you're not becoming a better person. You're not showing the fruit of the Spirit. Yeah. Everybody, the way of Jesus makes your life and everybody's life around you better, because it is those values that create a better world. Okay. What else you got on that?
Yeah. Well, to your point, we're literally watching history unfold, and people who claim to represent the way of Christ are, like this morning, we talked about some of Jesus's parables. Like Jesus wants his followers to understand that the nature of the kingdom of heaven is surprising. The way yeast works its way through dough, not necessarily a violent political coup. Mm-hmm. And I think there are followers of Christ making public headlines that maybe missed that. Right? They're still using the whole force strategy to make Jesus's name great, or, still about control, right?
Yeah, Matt's bringing up a great point, everybody. So Jesus in the garden, and we talked about this last week, okay, about God's will. Right? So God clearly didn't want them to eat from the tree because he told them that. He didn't force them to not eat from the tree. He allowed them to choose. So his will was for them not to eat from the tree, but they ate from the tree. Cain's mad with his brother Abel. God sees it. You better back down from that.
So scratching
clearly, yes, it's at the door. Yeah. God's will is for him not to murder Abel, but he still does it anyway. But God's not going to force us. Yeah. God's going to show us. Mm-hmm. That's why we should be famous for love. At least that's what Jesus says, right, in the Gospels. Yeah. So, okay.
Okay, while you kind of get ready for the next thing, I'm not sure I have a response formulated yet for Landrigan's question.
Oh, but you're going to try.
Well, no, I mean, I guess I'm just struggling with it because the question is, how can the here and now have meaning sting of physical death. And I guess there's a link that I'm missing in terms of like, what is it really that gives life meaning?
Yeah.
Or takes meaning away from life?
Yeah.
And maybe physical death is part of it, but I think it's probably a lot bigger than that, right?
Yes.
So I guess I wish this was a conversation. Maybe we were around a fire pit, but yeah, I would just ask for a little bit more in terms of where your head's at when, you know, you're attributing the here and now having meaning in general, or maybe even more meaning if there was no physical death, right? So I guess just to honor the question, that's where I'm at with that. Sorry, couldn't do better. But let's keep moving.
That was great.
That was great, yeah.
And from a biblical perspective, how do you view what some are calling the genocide of the Palestinian people when the Jewish people are God's chosen people? Wow. And why do you give us such an easy question?
Yeah. And you can do better.
Oh gosh. So this would take us down a long road. Let's just say this, okay? What's happening over in the Middle East is extremely sad. I hope that everybody can understand the tremendous pain on both sides. Not only what happened on October 7th, the horror that happened during that time, the tremendous pain. I have friends from the Arabic community, and they are distraught. Okay, is extremely sad, and we need to pray for peace. The Bible calls for us to pray for peace. The Bible calls for us to be peacemakers. Look, when God calls the Jewish people chosen people, that God is not saying, okay, do anything you want. I would also say this, everybody, when you read the Bible written by the Jewish people, I don't think you'll ever, Matt, find another text about a people that is so self-effacing as the Bible. I mean, constantly, the Jewish writers are writing about the Jewish people saying they're a stiff-necked people, okay? It is so brutally honest. Look, we are all, 100% of us, when we start vilifying other people as if I'm okay, right? But you're evil. Yeah. That's what Jesus is talking about. The beginning of dehumanization always begins with dehumanizing words. That's where it starts, with this thinking and with these words. God's chosen people just means that Abraham, you know, what's fascinating, Matt, Abraham is called the father of the faith for the Jewish people, the Christian people, and the Muslim people. Okay? They all call. So somehow there is a brother and sisterhood between these three monotheistic religions, and it's all tied together to the Bible, Genesis chapter 12, because of following Abraham. And, you know, it wasn't a nation. Abraham was a family. And this family is very fractured, and we need to pray for peace. You know, we are thinking about doing a service about peace pretty soon, because obviously it's very needed. We'll talk more about that. We'll talk more about that later, but thank you, Ann, for the question. That's a heavy one. Hey, I'm having a hard time finding my truth. I cannot seem to find what is right for me. What can convince me to truly believe in the Bible? I need your experience and wisdom. That's a great question. I'm going to take a first stab at it, if that's okay.
Please.
And then please, if you'll jump in.
Yeah.
So everybody, this is something that I am like extremely excited about, actually. We live in such a great time. We live in a time where we have so much writing about history, and we have so much data, like constant scientific data that's coming out from a multitude of places. And what I have seen is I have read about psychology, or I have read about what's happening relationally. I've read about addictions. I've read about all these things. And I've read a lot of historical data, church history data, and just history, okay? It is clear that the values that the Bible talks about 3,000 years ago, those very things, it's like I read them now in research data that's just come up in the last 20 years. It's the very thing that the Bible talked about 3,000 years ago. So one of the things I'm most excited about is that science and history is showing the validity of the Bible, the message of the Bible, that it's rock solid. It's rock solid. And something Matt and I have talked so much about is that, with so much distraction, our minds are just programmed by technology to be so distracted and on the move. You can't find peace. You can't find peace that way. You can't think deeply. You have to come to rest. God's very name means the very present one, the fully present one, to stop and to be at peace. And the foundation of so much of breaking addictions or breaking anxiety or breaking frustrations in life is what we call today mindfulness, what the Bible calls meditation. And the most foundational thing about mindfulness and meditation is to pause, to stop, and to breathe. Genesis chapter 2, he breathed into us the breath of life. All right, these connections, and we're going to get into them a lot more, are just abundant. You can fully trust. Once we understand the message of Jesus and the message of the Bible, you can 100% put your trust in it, because it's scientifically, historically verified to transform our lives.
Yeah.
You want to add anything? He's just contemplating that right now.
I would suggest, as a starting place, you're really wrestling with this question of how do I truly believe in the Bible. I think really step one is to make sure we're understanding this collection of ancient texts for what it is. Really helpful resource for me was, we're talking about them a lot, but the guys at Bible Project, they did a podcast series called the Paradigm Series.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, really helpful, kind of just working through, I don't want to call them like myths, about just misunderstandings about what the Bible actually is.
Yeah.
And then we think about, why some of the oldest texts that are a part of this collection are even important to us at all.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they were really important to the family that Jesus was a part of.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And they pointed to Jesus in powerful ways.
Yes.
And so, when it comes to truly believing in the Bible, it's in my mind, it's more about understanding what exactly is this collection of ancient texts and how does it point to Jesus? Because really, that's when it comes to believing in something or faith in something for Christians, it's primarily about believing that what was recorded about the events of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection were true.
Mm-hmm.
First century, right? That's ultimately what the belief is in. And then the rest is about understanding the fascinating works of, these ancient texts.
Mm-hmm.
But really, that's what we're believing more than anything else, is the resurrection was the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Death was defeated.
Yeah.
By the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all I got.
Okay. One thing I know, we're going to have to get the chat portion of this to be much bigger, Matt, because I can barely read it. Okay. All right. About 5 years ago, I sought the truth earnestly, genuinely and earnestly, not religion, not denomination. And I had the most amazing spiritual experience, life-changing experience. Oh, that's wonderful.
Hey, John, back up one more, because we've got more questions about the Bible being literal. You mentioned something a couple weeks ago in that message. We're doing the story of Jonah. Yeah. And you just snuck it in there. So two fish. So we got a question about the two fish.
Okay.
What can you share more?
Okay. So here's where it's really helpful to know Hebrew, or there's some websites. Like I use, what is it called? blueletterbible.org. Okay. Because you can see all the words in Hebrew or Greek. The Bible's mainly written in Hebrew, and then New Testament in Greek, written by a group of people thinking in Hebrew, writing in Greek, right? So actually, as you get to the end of Jonah chapter 1, there's a fish, and it's a dog, D-A-G, which is a male fish in Hebrew. And then I think it's in chapter 2, like the very verse later, chapter 2, verse 1, it says a daga, right? There's a daga. That's a female fish. So there's clearly a dog, a male fish, and a female fish, okay? So the original Bible scholars who are like reflecting on this and all of their writing is like, oh my gosh. So this is where it really gets fascinating. And this is why people look at Jonah as a satire, making a very important point, okay? Because Jonah, the man of God, he's not seeking God, and all the pagans are seeking God. Okay, it's weird. Okay, so it's like needling us to think about something. So when you get to the fish, it's like they say the male fish spit Jonah out, and the dagag, the female fish, and the female fish had so many babies in her womb. Now, here's another play, everybody, is the word for compassion that Jonah uses in his final, like, I'm so upset with you, God, because you're what? You're compassionate. Okay, the Hebrew word for compassion is the same root word for womb. Okay, now let's go back to the fish. So the male fish spits him out, swallowed by the female fish. She has so many babies in her womb that he has no room inside of her. He's squeezed up. He ran out of room. He had no more place to run. Remember, he's running. No place to run. He's smacked against the wall. Okay. And he prays, but he never repents. He never says, you know what? Yeah, we're all created in the image of God, which is what the prophet is supposed to say. Okay, right, Matt? And he doesn't do that. He's still mad at them. He's hanging on. And you can understand this, and the Bible understands this. He's been deeply, deeply hurt by the things that the Assyrian kingdom did, okay? And so he's very mad at them. Many of us have been hurt by people, and we're like ticked, like, I don't want. You ever had this happen? It's like some group of people or whatever, and you hear that somebody represented in that group of people, maybe it's national, maybe it's on TV, or maybe it's just somebody in school, okay? And you hear something bad about them, and like, it's really sad, but you're like, good, oh, that's great. And then you hear later, no, it wasn't true, and you're like, doggone it. You know what I'm saying? Because inside we're hurting, and we want bad things to happen to bad people, however we describe bad people. Okay, this is what Jonah's dealing with. So there's where the fish is. That's where the fish is. And so finally he's run out of room. He prays. He never repents. And God says, okay, spit him up on to the land. Okay. And there's a lot of deep imagery here because you've talked a lot about chaos. You talked about this morning, chaos.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So he's in the sea. He's in the chaos.
That's right.
He's where God is not, because he's saying what? Jonah is saying, my will be done. Just what Matt preached about this morning. That's where the chaos comes in. So there's chaos in our life when we like insisting on our will. There's death in our life, and he goes down into the tomb, right? So to speak, right? So there's all the imagery. There's the connection with Jesus. You want to say anything?
No, I don't. I haven't studied the two fish or Jonah near as much, so I'm not going to comment.
Yeah. What's fascinating, Matt, is there's not many very important themes in the Bible. These incredible values that God, we call it a revelation, that God has revealed from on high. But what happens in the Bible is you just keep hitting them over and over and over again. Why is that? Because we always drift from the foundational things that make our life great. You know, I've done a lot of marriage counseling in my life, a lot of it. John Gottman, who's like one of the greatest there is, scientifically looks at marriage. The things that make a marriage great are boiled down to very few things. He calls them the 4 horsemen. Why don't we acknowledge that? It's because we're drifters. We drift away from the most important things and we get into bad habits. Okay, Matt, shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. What was God's intention for creating hell? That's you, Matt. That's all you. Yeah. What's God's intention? You want to go back and talk about what their original thought was about hell? Like where it was? Like the geography of, like it was an actual place?
Yeah. So maybe that's a good place to start.
Okay.
I just want to repeat the question. What was God's original intention for creating hell?
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. I'm not sure that I've read anything really helpful about that. Okay. To be totally honest, there's a lot of people who would kind of challenge the assumption in the question.
Yeah.
That what we have most clearly a narrative about God creating paradise.
Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah.
really
Garden
what
of
we
Eden.
have. We have wisdom literature that describes God as the one who's creating a heaven.
Yeah.
Not so much about the creation of hell and who was behind it or what the ideas behind it.
Yeah.
As far as I have read or studied to this point. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Are you going to correct? Would you like to correct me? Am I off on this?
No. I just have a little something to say.
Yeah, go. Yeah, jump in.
Okay, everybody. Just can I just big picture? Can we just pull back and think about this for a second? I think it's really important. We're talking about heaven and hell. Okay, so I think that probably Matt, you throughout your schooling and mine, one of the most popular things that we heard is hell is Gehenna, and it was a trash dump that always burned outside of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Okay, and that was hell. And what my study has shown is that even though I heard that might not necessarily be true.
That's right.
That actually what Gehenna is, this place of burning, was where just outside of Jerusalem that some of the wicked kings or a place in northern Israel outside of wherever their palace was then, that they would actually sacrifice children.
All kinds of stuff. Absolutely. I think Ahaz was the really bad king who said, this is the place where we're going to worship idols and we're going to do whatever we want. And there's no rule. It's like sacrifice babies. Yeah. Fires are burning. It was wicked and awful and evil. Yeah. And to your point, and maybe this is just helpful background info. Jesus, he never used the word hell. That's an English word. When Jesus talked about realities where God's rule and reign was erased. He used 4 different kind of ideas and places throughout his teaching. He talked about Gehenna a lot, which was the Valley of Hinnom, just outside of Jerusalem, and that got shortened to Gehenna. But it's like, growing up in Northeast Ohio, we had some biases against people in West Virginia, and they were unfair. But when we wanted to make a point about those that with life where life was chaos, we would say, look at West Virginia, right? Yeah, totally unfair. But we would just say, hey, we would point to West Virginia and say it's chaos, it's crazy down there. People. So when Jesus is trying to talk about where God's rule and reign was erased, he would say, just check out what's happening outside this city in the valley, and he would just point to that. Yeah. Now, a lot of our translations, it doesn't say Gehenna, it just says hell. Right. But the point is, Jesus is just using an image that the people would clearly know and understand the history behind to make a point about a reality where God's rule and reign is erased. Right. Because Jesus used the Valley of Hinnom or Gehenna often. He borrowed from like the Greek idea of Hades and the grave. Yeah. A few times he just used this blanket term called the outer darkness, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Yep. And then there was one more. Jesus had 4 kind of predominant images that he would point to: Gehenna, Hades, the outer darkness, and there's one more. It's not coming to me right now, but anyway, for whatever that's worth, right. So we kind of take a lot of those teachings and they kind of mash up in our brains. And then we've got this kind of like Western concept of, a place of torment called hell. Yes. And where did it come from? I don't know, but we attribute it to God created that, maybe as a punishment, maybe. But I find a really hard time finding anything biblically that supports that kind of narrative. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So you hear a lot. Sorry, go ahead.
No. This is great. It's great.
Well, it's tricky, and I don't want to overstate this or overemphasize this as, hey, I'm sold on this being the actual story, but you do see a lot about God presenting paradise and heaven and life, and humans creating hell. Yeah. Humans are messing it up. Yeah. They're creating a reality where God's rule and reign is diminished And in those realities, our experience of pain and sadness and sorrow and all that just grows and grows, and it's awful and it's hell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you brought that up this morning, that your teens feel like they're living
in hell,
closer to the hell end of the extreme than they are to the heaven. They're not in between.
It's chaos.
Yeah,
it's chaotic.
They're living over here. I'd like to ask everybody on here a question, and it looks like there's 58 of us right now on here. Like, if you had a choice of the family that you live in and the neighborhood that you live in, that everybody in your family and everybody in your neighborhood were in the future going to heaven. Don't know which, their emphasis basically is in the future, that they're going to be in heaven with Jesus, right? Which is awesome. Or they were living like Christ and worshiping Jesus and his values above all. And they weren't thinking about heaven later on in the future, that, hey, I've got my ticket punched. But instead, they're far, far, far more interested in living out his love, his mercy, his grace, his truth, his forgiveness, his kindness, his boundaries, because we break a lot of boundaries, we do a lot of things. If you had a choice between living in a family that was like, okay, but one day I get to go to heaven, or a neighborhood where everybody's that way, or living in a neighborhood where people are like, I'm living for Jesus right here, right now, living out his values every single day. Which one would you choose to live in? Number one or number two? Because there's a lot of people, I think, Matt, that have lived in families and had neighbors that they'll say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, and I'm going to heaven. Because you know what, Matt, the studies show that almost 100% of people believe they're going to heaven anyway, right?
Yeah,
That's what the studies show.
Well, Jesus says, well, actually, I never knew you.
Right.
Yeah. I never knew you.
Yeah. I think what we're trying to emphasize is that Christ is calling us to live for him right here, right now, and it makes a big difference. So we're going to read a couple of this, and I see Landrigan's, he's back in. He's still coming back. Can you speak to the intertextuality picture you presented several weeks ago and how that proves or disproves the Bible? Well, we're going to get back into intertextuality here in just a few weeks, because it's super duper important, because we're going to study this incredible book of Esther. It's the last book of the Hebrew Bible, and it is a feast of intertextuality. And how does it prove or disprove the Bible? You're going to see so many connections. And here's my biggest thing, okay? And we'll definitely do this in, 3 weeks when we talk about, is the Bible anti-women? There's a context. And a lot of people read one verse and like they're going to build their whole life on that one verse. And the Bible says never to do that. And how that leads us astray, misinterpreting what God's word. So I'm going to come to that intertextuality a whole lot. You're still getting a lot of questions about what happens after you die. To be clear, are you saying that the Bible does not answer that question? Lauren says you can ignore me.
Thank you, Lauren.
You, Lauren.
You've always been my favorite Landrigan.
You have anything you want to say?
I actually really like what Tammy contributed on the chat. Yeah. Number one, heaven on earth. Yeah, let's go. Heaven on earth. This is what Jesus was after. ... But only as a preview to the experience that we get to enjoy for forever. Yeah, I think that's really well put. So let's start with that. Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah, Tammy.
No, back to Chris. Well, let's not ignore Chris.
Yeah.
He's just going to keep coming at us.
He's just going to keep going.
Yeah.
And I will note to you that I think in 2023, one of the top novels written was The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. And it was all about this same, this wasn't a Christian book. This was a novel.
Yeah, I read it.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah,
considered one of the top books, right? It was all about actually living out the values of God right here on earth, and what happens when you do and what happens when you don't. Anyway, go ahead, Matt. Give us some wisdom.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Okay.
But Chris, you're kind of coming back with, just seeking clarification. Are we saying that the Bible does not answer the question about what happens after we die? I'm not saying that.
Nope.
I think, but the thing that the Bible maybe is most clear about is that, the choices we make here on earth impact eternity.
Yes.
Right. And in a sense, we're getting to pre-decide our eternal experience in a way. I want to go back because what I just said, I'm not sure that's exactly how I wanted to have said it.
Yeah. Say it again, Matt.
I'm going to take another run at it, but it might take me a while to formulate. I guess what I'm getting at is, God's dreams are clearly outlined, and it is for us to be in relationship with him, for us to experience here now on earth, but also, forever.
Yeah.
God's dream is for us to experience the good, what the God community has experienced for all of eternity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Relationships marked by mutual admiration, self-sacrificing love,
yeah,
complete unity, being of one mind.
Yeah.
That kind of deal. And I guess as far as I've been able to kind of determine, we get, again, back to what Tammy said, we get previews of what eternal realities can be like. We are previewing the chaos and kind of like the death, the sorrow, the sadness of what happens when we choose, it's got to be my way. We can all just do our own thing.
Right.
And we also are getting previews of the glory and the goodness of what it will be like to be with God. We'll just say in heaven, right?
Yes.
Forever. So
that's good.
And also keep coming back to, Jesus talked about just the restoration, like a new heaven and new earth.
Yes.
Right. And maybe you can speak to this, but again, it goes back to, I think we should be careful about the narratives we've bought into about there and then.
Yeah.
Because there's just few clear data points on what that's going to be like. So
that's excellent, Matt.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Big hand from Matt Komar. Listen, we're going to try to wrap this up if we can. Okay, everybody. Let's see if we can tie a bow on all this discussion. Matt is not saying, and his email address is matt.komar@trygrace.org if you want to say anything to him. He's not saying that the Bible does not believe in the afterlife. The Bible clearly believes in the afterlife.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I think you
We're
listed
eternal beings.
You listed some great resources, and I guess you can go on our app, or you can go to the end of the message on our YouTube channel, on our website, and you can see all the resources. There's some really good ones there, some good books. Bible Project has done a lot of work on this.
Yep.
Okay. The Bible is more interested in how are we living life right here and now. Okay. So I want to sum up by saying this. Storyline of the Bible. In the beginning, God creates the Garden of Eden, which is like a tabernacle or a temple of God's presence.
Yeah.
Now, Matt, where was Adam created? So we're told in Genesis 2, he was created outside of the garden.
Oh, yeah.
And then God put him in the garden and said, okay, just follow these ways, right? Mm-hmm. And Adam and Eve decide not to follow the ways, and so they have to leave the garden. And then you get to Exodus, and then what's the storyline of that? Now, God built the tabernacle of his presence. And what is that? Where his will and ways are being done, okay? Yeah. And now, they are supposed to build a tabernacle for God on earth. Like, so God built one, and they left it. Now they need to work to build it. And how do they work? How do they do that? Everything about the tabernacle is about them following the values that God has revealed. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because we didn't come up with these values. Some people say, well, okay, I know the values. I'll just live by them. Whoa, time out, dude. That's almost like plagiarism. Like, God released the values. There was no sign of humanity, like one day sitting down and saying, oh, here's some great values. So the concept of love came from the Bible, right? Simon May's great work on, what did he call that book? The History of Love, I think, right? People in the Western world, if you ask them on the street, what's the definition of love? They're pretty much going to give you the definition that came right out of the Bible. So all I'm trying to say is equality and love and forgiveness and protecting the vulnerable, these things. These are all things that drop down out of heaven. Yeah. A human being did not come up with them, okay? Also, finally to this, Matt, you have to respect a God outside of the game, so to speak, who makes the call on what is right and wrong.
Oh yeah, you talked about this before.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because if the players don't get on the field, because that's chaos. That's chaos.
Yeah.
So I can't, okay, you might say, well, I'll decide what's right for me, and you decide what's right for you. That's total chaos, because you're subjective, I'm subjective, I'm selfish, you're selfish, right? We all know you're very selfish. So all of these things, right? Okay. So it's got to be somebody else at the game. So here, I want to tie this up. If we actually live according to the ways of God as revealed in Scripture, that's heaven on earth.
Yeah.
And you and I have to work hard to create that. Okay. Matt, you've done a fantastic, good sermon this morning. As you said, best sermon ever preached at Grace Community Church. Please send your praise to matt.comar@trygrace.org. Thank you very much. Landrigan, thank you for all your questions. Lauren, thank you for restraining Chris Landrigan. Everybody, we hope you'll join us again. We're going to do this more in the future, right? Have an awesome week. Love you all.